Here on KGRA Radio, welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Greetings. Very excited to have my guest for this program. This is aviation. I'm going to say the word legend, James or Jim Goodall. He's a little more modest, but I think that he qualifies. This is a man who is one of the earliest investigators into what we now know as Area 51 back in the 80s and early 90s. Even before there was Bob Lazar, James Goodall, as an aviation journalist, was investigating some of the most advanced aircraft that was under design and production by the United States. And it took him to that secret place known as Area 51. And he learned a lot, and he's never stopped. It's a funny thing. When I first started researching UFOs way back in the 90s, James Goodall had been there and done that, to use that phrase. Jim, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I've had a love of aviation since I was a little kid. When I was about 4.5, 5 years old, my dad came into the bedroom. We were living in San Jose, and he said, "I don't know what's coming, but you have to see it." And we walked outside, and because I was already gone to bed. And over the Coast Mountains, heading to Travis, were not one, not two, but 24 Condor B-36s. And that sort of
wow, those are huge aircraft, right? They were enormous.
They called it a magnesium overcast. 230-foot wingspan, 10 engines. And that's what really, I have always been into machines, planes, trains, and automobiles. And it's always been a passion of mine. It will always be a passion of mine. And because of that, I've become an expert on a number of areas. Area 51 is one of them, only because the airplanes that I'm so thoroughly taken by are the Blackbird, the F-117, the U-2 to a certain extent. And I've written books on the B-2. And some of the other stuff they have going on there the government won't say Area 51. The guys at Lockheed won't say Area 51. They refer to it as the test site. But it has been a place. John Lear and I were probably the first two guys to go up to the top of Whitesides and to photograph Area 51. And John and I are probably the primary reason why Whitesides and Freedom Ridge are now off limits.
Yeah, back in the late 80s, John Lear made his own name in the fringe UFO circles, for sure, around the time that you were digging in as well. And I wonder if you could tell folks just what you were up to in the 1980s and what got you over to the test site and looking at some of things that really kind of intersected with the world of UFOs, some of the advanced things that you learned about.
Well, I mean, I've always had a passion for things that go bump in the night. I've interviewed guys my boss in the Air Guard, Wayne Gatlin, Major General. He chased one over Lake Superior, and it outran him. This is back in the 50s. I have, because of my passion for the Blackbird, that its first home was Area 51. Mm-hmm. And on that, and I knew it was the premier flight test facility for black programs. So I started going there. And I think the first time I went up Freedom Ridge was 87. Not Freedom Ridge, Whitesides was 87.
Okay.
I actually believe that I was in Area 51 in 1964. I was an airman second class. They don't use that term anymore. I was an E3. Mm-hmm. I was at Edwards to support 3 programs for Category 1 flight testing for ground-based telemetry.
Okay.
I'm not a pilot. I'm just an aviation enthusiast who's very confident when it comes to airplanes. So I was installing equipment at Edwards for category testing for 3 programs: the YC-141 Starlifter, the XB-70 Valkyrie, and at the time a classified program, which turned out to be the Lockheed Skunk Works Blackbird.
Wow. Okay.
And on March 10th, 1964, I saw my first Blackbird, and that has affected me. I mean, it was almost like seeing my first naked woman when I was 11 or 12. In real life, someone. It was really quite an experience. And
hey, more that do you think about how few people can say this today that they saw the SR-71 Blackbird, fastest, officially still, I think the fastest aircraft in aviation history. I'm sure it's been surpassed, I would imagine, but fastest aircraft back in 1964. That's amazing. And it's a legendary aircraft, and you were seeing it back then.
And because of what I was doing at Edwards, I was there about 2.5 weeks, and they said we have to install some equipment somewhere else. So we got on a Fairchild F-27, high wing, turboprop. We flew for about 90 minutes, got out next to a hangar. There were buses on either side of the airplane. We were told not to look around, just go into the door of the hangar. Mm-hmm. I'm still in the desert, so I could have been anywhere in the desert Southwest. Chances are I wasn't. Chances are I was in Area 51.
Wow.
I was there for about 5 hours. They brought in a box lunch, finished that, got back, and when I got done, the airplane was still sitting next to the hangar. We went inside. Just the windows, inside windows were covered up, and we took off, flew for another 9 minutes, and landed at Edwards. So I believe I was in Area 51.
Sure, that's a reasonable supposition, I would say. That seems quite reasonable indeed. Fascinating. So by the time you were working as a journalist in the 80s, you'd had a lot of experience with that part of the world, with Edwards and with the Nevada test site area. This is all, I'm guessing it was almost second nature to you to investigate some of the things that were going on there. Does that seem a fair statement?
It's my job as American taxpayer to know what my government's up to.
Mm-hmm.
And a good example, Bill Sweetman.
I love hearing that. I just love that you said that.
Yeah. A good example, Bill Sweetman and I wrote the very first book on the F-117. It came out in 87. The world hadn't seen it until 88. I had photographed it, but the public didn't see the first one until 1990. And I was activated for Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I'm at the Pentagon. At the time, I'm a tech sergeant. I'm an East 6.
Okay.
And I went to get my permanent Pentagon pass, and they said, well, you're under investigation for something. Duh. So I knew who I had to go talk to. So I called up a guy named Pete Ames. He's Deputy Director of Program Security for Special Projects. I said, Pete, you're screwing with my security clearance. I'm here at the Pentagon. Where are you located? I didn't know if he was at Bowling or somewhere else.
Right.
Said, I'm in 5D 156. Now, they don't use those number systems anymore, but he was on the 5th floor on the D ring. So I go up to D ring, go there, walk up to the door. Nothing there but the 5D 156. No name, no organization. I press the buzzer on the cipher lock. The door opens, and there's a young lady behind the desk. I said, I'm Jim Goodall. I'm here to see Pete Ames. And her jaw about hit the desk. So I said, well, it'll be about 15 minutes. So I'm sitting there. I'm in uniform, and I have a procession of people, both in and out of uniform, walking by. Jim, you want to see what Jim Goodall looks like? Come here, Jim Goodall's here. So
your reputation preceded you, sir.
Yeah.
Big time.
Same with John Dillinger and Al Capone too. So Pete comes out, and he's another agent, and we start having a discussion about primarily my block on my security clearance. I had a top secret clearance for 27 years. So Pete said, when I saw your book on Bill and I did in the F-117, I wanted to put you on active duty and charge you with espionage. I stood up, pulled a copy of the book, and I threw it on the desk, and it's autographed to Pete. And I said, Pete, there's Exhibit 1, charge me. It's not in the best interest of the program. I said, because you don't have the balls to do it. And we're going around. I mean, this was a hostile. He said, I don't like the questions you're asking. And I looked him right in the face. I said, Pete, it is my job to challenge my government. It is my job to question my government. And there isn't a person in this building that's going to stop me from challenging and asking questions of my government. If it's not classified and I'm an American citizen and a taxpayer and I ask a question, I expect an honest answer. If it's classified, you say no comment. I don't want a line of crap. And he said, well, so you have stuff in your book that's still classified above top secret. I said, Pete, I sent you a copy of the draft before I sent it to the publisher. I sent it to the head of the CIA. I sent it to the head, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Air Force, and to Ben Rich. Ben was a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. Ben sends me an email. He said, Jim, I would love to do the forward, but I can't because of security restrictions. The program is still very, very classified.
Sure. So
this went on, and he said, these are my airplanes. I said, Pete, you don't own a damn thing. These are owned by the American taxpayers. Your job is to maintain the article. If it's classified, then it's your job to make sure it stays within reasonable boundaries, still classified. But it's not your airplane. It belongs to the American people. We the people, not you the government. We're the sole owner. And he's getting really riled up. And I finally, after about 90 minutes, said, Pete, are we done? Well, I think so. And Pete was kind of a short guy. And I said, now I'm in uniform. I'm in his territory. I'm behind a cipher locked door in a very classified environment. And I put my face right up to his face. I said, Pete, you know what really pisses you off about me? He said, what's that? He says, I'm not afraid of you. And I go, turn around and leave. He turned a color red. Well, it's probably redder than that. I mean, he turned the color red and left. And then I heard from a friend of mine who worked.
You gave him a raspberry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I had a friend of mine who worked there at the Pentagon, and I talked to him about 3 or 4 days later. He knew where I was at, and he said, your friend Pete? I said, yeah. I said, they sent him home 15 minutes after you left because his blood pressure went through the roof, and they couldn't get it down. I'd upset him so much.
How about that? Well, you're absolutely right. And, by the way, I'm sure there's a lot of people who just listened to what you said and thought, wow, this is my new hero. Like, I really believe, Americans need to be reminded of the fact that government works for us. We don't work for the government. And you were doing this in the pre-9/11 days. That's like a whole different universe, in my opinion, where people still were more likely, I would say, in my opinion, to have that attitude like, yeah, you belong to us. And we are the taxpayers, and we paid for this. So that's actually just wonderful that you were able to say that.
And I feel stronger. I actually feel stronger today about that than I did back in '89.
Good. I think all of us need to feel more strongly about it as the years go by, because it just seems like we live in the upside down world, as far as I can tell. So let's remember what the words freedom and personal privacy and all that mean.
Well, it's still in the back of my head. Before I forget, I'm at that age where you have those senior moments. I'm pushing 75. I'm very, very proud of what I've accomplished. In my heart and soul, I'm either 15 or 30. Mm-hmm. 75. But we need people like Michael Schratt to go out in the desert, to go challenge our government. I mean, I can still do it, and I am still doing it occasionally. I was out of the loop for about 10 years. I had 4 years in Hawaii. Then when I retired, I've just been writing. But we need the young blood. We need people out there that, I don't mind go sleeping out in a tent on a sleeping bag. The hard part is trying to get up on my feet. And some of you out there, who are approaching my age can understand that. I'm not a physical person, but I don't let my age slow me down. But we need young blood.
And Michael, by the way, is just such an amazing, fantastic researcher, and he's dedicated, he's conscientious, and he's got a lot of energy. And yeah, we're really lucky to have him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He actually got a job in Oro Valley, where I live, so he could be within 10 minutes or 5 minutes of my house.
Yeah, he's smart. Like he knows where the gold mine's located. It's right there in your house where you are.
I think
Here's the gold mine of information.
yeah.
So can I ask you? So, well, can we assume that they took the ding off your security clearance? Were you cleared after that, or what?
Well, the thing is, if when the flag went up on my clearance,
Mm-hmm.
my wing commander, by regulation, was supposed to have been informed within 24 hours, and it had been like a year and a half. And my boss
Wow.
John Broman. He was 1-star. He was pissed.
He should be because that's seriously against regulation, probably the law.
Yeah,
It sounds like it'd be an illegal thing to do.
and I had another event at the Pentagon when I was there that had to do with Bob Lazar. And
Okay, let's hear about it.
I had Bob's W-2 when he was paid by the Navy to work out at S4. I had blocked off his Social Security number, but I had about 90 minutes. I was waiting for something to happen, so I had about 90 minutes, and I decided I was going to go to Naval Investigative Services or Naval Intelligence Service or whatever. The name on the W-2 was not a normal Navy location. But I found a place in the Pentagon, and I walked in the office, and there's a young lieutenant sitting behind the desk. And I said, and I handed him Bob's W-2. And I said, can you tell me what this location is? He looks at it, looks at me. He gets up, goes into the 2-star's office. He's in there for about a minute. He comes out and said, the admiral will see you. Now, no admiral is going to unannounced without an appointment talk to an Air Force puke, an enlisted guy to boot. I don't think so.
Right.
So
you walk in to see an admiral,
and I gave him a good sharp salute, and he said parade rest. He didn't say at ease. He said parade rest. So I'm standing there, and he's looking at Lazar's W-2, and so he said, Sergeant, I don't know where you got this, but if I ever see your face come through my threshold again, you're going to be the most sorry son of a bitch tech sergeant in the United States Air Force. Do we understand? I said, yes, sir. And with that, he took Bob's W-2 and put it in the shredder. He says, you're dismissed. I give him a salute. I do a about face, and I walk out the door.
All right, so let's just pause right there so that you can explain, because there's probably some people listening who may not fully appreciate the significance of this. So Bob Lazar, as everyone knows, everyone in the world knows Bob Lazar now, claimed that he had worked at a place called S4 in the general vicinity of Area 51, and that he had been exposed to presumably alien extraterrestrial flying saucers. And part of the controversy about Lazar involved this W-2 form in which he was working, I think it was Office of Naval Intelligence, correct? ONI.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Now you found this. Were you the first person to find that W-2?
To me. Bob gave me a copy of his W-2.
Got it. I see.
Bob's a friend of mine.
Yeah. Okay.
I met Bob before he went to work out in the desert.
So what was your interpretation then of the Admiral's response? It was just like, this is real. Don't ever show me this again. He wasn't, I mean, it wasn't like he thought it was fake. That didn't seem to be the case.
If it had been faked, the lieutenant would not have wasted the 2-star's time.
Sure.
When I gave him that thing and he looked at it and he said, just a minute. And he went to see the 2-star. He's in there for about a minute. And then I go in there and that 2-star was irritated. When I walked in there, I knew this wasn't going to be a fun minute or two. And I was in there. I couldn't been in there more than 90 seconds.
So let's talk about Lazar. I mean, you know him well and you guys are friends. So what's your sense of what happened to Bob Lazar when he was at S4? I mean, I guess let me just say this. What's your assessment of Bob Lazar's story? How would you describe what Bob Lazar did, in your opinion?
Bob Lazar's story has never changed, even when it was financially to his benefit for him to exaggerate. His story has been consistent.
Yeah.
Now the thing that's just really sticks. Now I had this had to be 88 timeframe.
Mm-hmm.
They had announced the existence of the F-117. It was either just before the announcement or just after the announcement, which November 22nd, 88, or November 11th, one of the two. They did the B-2 and the F-117 the same month. One was the 22nd, one was the 11th.
Stealth fighter and stealth bomber, for those who
Right.
never know. Yeah.
So I just photographed the F-117, and that was an experience and a half. You know, John Lear and I were driving up US 95 near Scotty's Junction, and an F-117 flew right over us. I mean, he couldn't be more than 1,000 feet, and I almost drove the car off the road. And so John and I made it to Tonopah. We drove down 6. He said, "I think I know where this place is at," and we headed down the road to Tonopah Test Range, and I'm going to go along the fence line, and 117 flew over with a T-38. And I was shooting print film. I normally shot Kodachrome, but this type of stuff I'd shot print film because I could turn it faster. And out of 36 exposures, there was only 3 that weren't blurred. I mean, it was like seeing my first naked girl. Sounds almost like the B-36. My camera, my whole body is vibrating.
Right.
So we finally get back to Lear's house in Vegas, and all the photomats. And those of you who are old enough remember photomats. They've been replaced by baristas now in the same little building in the parking lot. So I had to wait. You know, they were all the photomats were closed. I had to wait till the next morning, and John Lear said, "Well, I have a buddy of mine coming over. You know, you'll probably enjoy meeting him." So we got into John's about 9:15 p.m.
Okay.
About 9:30, Bob Lazar shows up, and John introduced me. It's my friend Bob. He's only been here a short while. He is interviewing for a job out in the desert, and I think you'd find what his background interesting. And I told Bob, I said, "Hey, I have this roll of film. Excuse me. And I have to wait till tomorrow to get it processed." He said, "Well, I have a C41 processor at home. It's front of my house over in West Charleston." So sure. So we jumped in his car and we're heading towards his house. And he looks at me and said, "I really feel sorry for Lear." I said, "What do you mean feel sorry for Lear?" I said, "Some bitch believes in UFOs." I said, "I'm a nuclear physicist. If I can't touch it or prove it mathematically, it doesn't exist." And I mean, he was dead serious about that.
Wow. Okay.
So we get to say it's got the thing processed. And
all of the early video of him, he comes across exactly that way. I mean, that really does seem totally consistent with how he has been for as long as anyone's known him.
And when I went to his house, he had a lot of neat stuff. He had an incredible diploma on his wall, and I didn't stare at it. I just looked at it and said, "Wow, that's a nice looking diploma." And I believe it was from MIT.
Now this is important because this is a whole big sticking point, right? Stanton Friedman for years said that's a fraud. He never went to MIT. Are you saying you saw an MIT diploma there?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Also,
that's really big news, because how many people have ever claimed to have seen that?
Probably Gene Huff probably may have seen it, unless his house was broken into when he was gone. All his personal papers, everything he could use to prove who he was gone. There wasn't anything monetarily taken, but his social security number that he has, his card in his wallet, has never been issued according to the United States government.
Wow. I didn't know the social security card part of that. That's quite remarkable.
Yeah. He said the social security number has never been issued.
But the key is you remember seeing a diploma from MIT. Do you remember what the diploma was of? I mean, I realize that's a long time ago.
A buddy of mine's dad had a PhD from MIT, and they looked the same. I looked at it, wow, pretty impressive. And he had a supercomputer in his office. He had a 19-inch NEMA cabinet, and it was nothing but computers from about 5 feet down to the floor. And he was It was probably the equivalent of an iPhone 6 today. But
Come on, that good? Seriously?
Back in '88. I mean, that's what, 30 years ago?
Yeah, I mean,
There was no
just say maybe we could just say it was advanced iPhone 6. I don't know.
Yeah, and he's as smart as he comes across. But when George Knapp went to Albuquerque to investigate Bob's background, he said he'd worked at Sandia Labs, working on developing nuclear weapons. They were trying to get the cost per kill from 12 cents per body down to 10.5 cents. That's our government at work.
Yeah. Go accountants.
Right. Pretty much.
Yeah.
So George Knapp went to the public part of the Sandia library, pulled out a directory that was during the time Bob said he worked there, and it's opened up. There's a Robert Lazar, and the phone number that Bob had given George. The people he said he worked in the same office looked up there, and their name was in there with the correct number. When George Knapp asked Edward Teller, Bob said that Edward Teller is the person that hired him. Edward Teller wouldn't comment.
Well, Jim, hold that thought right there. We're going to take a very, very quick break. I'm Richard Dolan here with James Goodall, Jim Goodall, aviation legend, who knows everything there is to know, in my view, about the 1980s and 90s Area 51 and all the advanced tech and the Bob Lazar story. We're going to come right back after this. Don't go away. Welcome back. I'm here with James Goodall, and we are James's James or Jim? You go by Jim?
I go by Jim.
Jim is dishing it out right now on Bob Lazar, and you were just about to talk about Edward Teller and that whole kind of Edward Teller, again, for those who don't know their history, very, very important nuclear physicist involved in the hydrogen bomb project. One of the key scientists.
They consider Edward Teller the father of the hydrogen bomb.
And of course, pretty much portrayed by Peter Sellers in Dr. Strangelove.
Right.
Got to say that was the inspiration. And it was always said that Teller was the mentor of Bob Lazar to get him into his job with over down by S4. So you were just talking about Teller.
When George Knapp interviewed Edward Teller and asked him about Bob, he had no comment. Now the thing, if you're dealing with something that's classified, you can't comment one way or the other. You just say no comment, which Edward Teller did. If Bob Lazar was a fraud, if Bob Lazar had never met Edward Teller, Bob Lazar was not who he says he was, Edward Teller would have said, that guy's a fraud. I've never met him. I don't know who he is. And everybody that George talked to would not comment, because to comment, yes, I worked with him, or no, I don't know him, or anything, was just no comment, because you can neither confirm nor deny the existence of something that's classified.
Absolutely. Really good point.
Yeah.
So I think, so in terms of what Lazar said he did, we haven't really talked about your take on UFOs, both terrestrial or non-terrestrial. I would really love to hear you just give your take on that, as well as where you think we are in terms of some of the advanced tech that you've learned about a lot, and there's a lot of questions out there as to how far it goes. But just one more question about Bob Lazar. So in terms of his claim that he was brought in to work on or study, I guess we could say, flying saucers.
Reverse engineering of the propulsion system on what is referred to as the sports model, UFO.
Exactly. So do you believe that, or do you not believe that?
I believe that.
Okay.
That completely.
Completely.
And there's his story. I mean, I think he was offered a large sum of money to say that he saw saw the Greys or the aliens. Now he said he saw referencing, they called them the kids, because apparently the Greys aren't very big, but there were posters in the hallways and stuff like that. It's just, but he never saw an alien, but he did, say that he was working on just the sports model, but there was other bays and he could see other craft in there, and he figured there was about 9 of them.
Right.
Nine.
That was the sense. And
Now,
also, the inside of the one he was working on was obviously too small for a normal-sized human being.
Right.
That.
Now, to step back a bit about S4, I have a buddy of mine that was one of the early enlisted guys on the F-117 program at Area 51. He was there at the production, and when the first airplane was moved to Area 51, he basically went along with it. And he was there for 4 years. His Area 51 badge allowed him to be anywhere in the Nevada test site. There was no restrictions, because the most restricted area was where he worked.
Mm-hmm.
So they're driving around the Papoose Range, which is the backdrop to Area 51. And they come around the southwest corner, and they're on this dry lake bed, which is a Papoose Lake. And they're just driving around because there was a road going back, a dirt road. And it was Roy and 2 other maintenance guys. And he said, now I didn't ask him about S4. I didn't ask my friend Roy about Bob Lazar. He's telling me about his time at Area 51 and some of the stuff he did. He said, and it was a curiosity thing. He said, after I was there for a while, a bunch of us, drove around on a Humvee over just around the area, and we're on this dry lake bed, and said, from out of nowhere appeared a handful of guys in black utilities sporting machine guns, and said, what are you guys doing here? I want to see some identification. So they showed him their line badge, and he said, and the security people, or whoever it was, told him and said, you have no reason to be here. You're to leave now. But there's no vehicles. They don't know where in the hell he came from. And this was the same location that Bob said S4 was located.
Interesting. Very interesting. So is that the closest that you've had to maybe a confirmation or corroboration that there is a place such as S4? Because it's always been denied, officially speaking, but other people have said it exists.
I didn't interview the guy, but I saw a brief clip on him. There was a Mormon missionary was following the trail of the lost Mormon tribe, and it passed through the south end of Area 51 into Mercury, and it was lost somewhere probably in Death Valley or whatever.
Okay.
So he asked permission to cross over the south end of Area 51 and go into the Nevada test site, and he was turned down. But he was determined to find some stuff. So he, on the west side, he made it through over the fence in Mercury. He did this at night. He knew where, he knew basically where he was going, and he found an undercropping, and that's where he put out his sleeping bag, and that's where he spent the night. Because he didn't want, if he was using a flashlight or whatever, he didn't want anybody flying over to see him.
Right.
He said in the middle of the night he had to get up to go to the bathroom, and he was looking towards the Papoose Range and Papoose Lake, where S4 is allegedly located. And he said it was like someone was opening a garage door. He said a light just started getting brighter, and it's quite a distance away. And he watched it, and there was some activity, and then the thing closed. He said the next morning he got his binoculars out to see what if he can see better, and there was nothing there. And that's basically all he said. He didn't dig it any deeper, but this was a comment from someone not involved in UFOs, not involved in Area 51 research, not involved in anything related to aviation, saying that there were lights at the southwest corner of the Papoose Range where Bob Lazar said S4 is located.
It's very consistent with how Lazar described it, which was extremely camouflaged, right? Like you were really not able to see this from the outside or from above.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now,
very interesting.
Now, Ben Rich was a friend of mine. I don't know how I got on his friend list, but John Andrews from Testers and I were in the same category. We were a pain in the ass, but Ben really liked what we did. John Andrews could write a letter to Ben on a Monday And by Wednesday or Thursday, he had a handwritten reply back from Ben. That's how the relationship was.
And before you go on, just again, people should know Ben Rich. I think a lot of listeners know very well who Ben Rich was, but he was the second head of Lockheed's Skunk Works division, succeeding Kelly Johnson. And Ben, of course, oversaw the development of the F-117 stealth fighter, and was very much a legend at Lockheed for many, many years. So whatever there was to know about aviation, we can assume Ben Rich probably knew it.
Absolutely. I mean, the most classified programs in the world, Ben probably had access to.
Right.
Yeah, he died too soon because he was going to give me an interview, no holds barred. But
wow.
Even has the letter of him saying, yeah, both my letter to Ben and his letter back saying, well, as soon as I get this book done with Leo Janos, his time at the Skunk Works, we can sit down and talk. But he died of esophageal cancer. I called him. I believe. I called him about 10 days before he died. He was at USC Medical Center, and I was calling him to see how he was doing. And we were talking about John Andrews, and Tester had come out with the SR-75 mother airplane and the XR-7 penetrator. We were talking about that. He said, "I'm disappointed in John's Aurora, the XR-7 penetrator." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Well, a Mach 12 liquid methane fueled airplane would have to have an internal volume at least 4 times the size of John's model." Now, I didn't say Mach 12. What about the Mach 12 airplane? What about the cryogenic fuel with liquid methane? And it'd have to be big and fat to carry the liquid methane. And Ben also said, there's no difference in air refueling at cryogenic fuel as there is JP4. So JP4, the fumes will go down in the cracks and crevices, and if something could light a match. That's where the gases, the lighter than air gases, go to the top. So
what he's really doing is confirming the existence of the Aurora. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me.
Absolutely.
That's what he's doing.
Yeah. And then I have another piece to that story too. So Ben said, "Jim, we have things." Now this is 1998, 99 when Ben died.
He died in 95, I believe. Isn't that right? 95, I thought.
Maybe it was 95. John Andrews died in 98.
Yeah.
Ben said, it was just before Christmas. He said, "Jim, we have things out in the desert." Now, he wasn't referring to Area 51. He said, "We have things out in the desert that's 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. Not what you think you can build in 50 years, but what you can comprehend." And for me, I can comprehend an awful lot of strange stuff. And then he said, "If you've seen movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort." I said, "Ben, you want to expand upon that?" He said, "No." This was his deathbed confession. We have stuff out in the desert that's real, and it would make George and two other people independent.
Let's talk about these. This is years earlier, right? Back in the 80s, I think.
Early 80s.
Early 80s. So please tell this story. This is really important, I think.
I won't give his name because he's still alive. He worked at Area 50. He was at 36, 37 years with the Skunk Works. He had 10 full years at Area 51. And I was asking him, I said, first name was Bill. I said, "Bill," I said, "do you believe in UFOs?" He said, "Jim," "we have things out in the desert that would make George Lucas envious." Another guy said basically the same thing, but he referred to Steven Spielberg.
This must be a thing like around where they work. They've got to be saying this amongst themselves, right? Sounds like it.
Yeah. Well, now there's a guy. Now he denies it now, but when I interviewed,
you also didn't you say, can you expand on that? And he also said no. Am I getting that right?
Right. Both the other guys said no, because I really wanted to know.
Right.
And these are senior people at ADP, which is also called the Skunk Works, Advanced Development Programs or Projects. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's just another piece of the puzzle.
So what do you think is the technology? You must have thought about this. Are they working with liquid fuels? Are they working with something beyond that? I mean, they're all saying beyond Star Trek, Star Wars. So wait, you just mentioned anti-gravity?
Yep, yep.
Let's get into that.
Well, that's basically what the propulsion system was on the sports model that Bob Lazar was working on. The element 115, and even Einstein theorized that you could have a stable element above 104 or 105 on the periodic table, and 115 happened to be feasible, but it's not found in nature here.
And they have a devil of a time trying to get the right isotope, I imagine.
Right. My mind just went blank.
Oh, well, okay. So we're talking about the technology. I mean, are they dealing with some kind of anti-gravitic, anti-gravity technology out there? Do you have any reason to believe that?
Based on what Ben said to me directly, based on what Bob Lazar has told me to my face, I was a volunteer at Kitt Peak National Observatories. And if people not familiar with Kitt Peak has the largest collection of optical telescopes in the world. There's 22 optical telescopes on Kitt Peak and 2 radio telescopes, a 12 meter and a 25 meter. The biggest mirror they have up there is the 4 meter Mayall telescope, and that's going to be being used now to identify dark energy or dark matter.
Wow.
But on the 2.1 meter telescope, which was managed and controlled and used by Caltech, for 5 years they did in a small part of the Milky Way, they were looking for exoplanets, planets that exist outside of our solar system, and using adaptive optics. They'd shine a UV laser up to 18,000 feet, and it had to be a real specific diameter, and I don't know how they measured it. But the mirror that goes into the camera, recording the images, adjusts itself 1,200 times a minute.
That's unbelievable. My God.
1,200 times a second, not a minute. And they're getting comparable resolution from a ground-based telescope than that of the Hubble. And over the course of 5 years, in a very, very small part of our galaxy, they identified over 8,000 exoplanets. They've even had planets with a binary star system.
So this is where you worked as a volunteer for a number of years.
Correct. And
very
and I left because I didn't like the new volunteer coordinator. I don't like anybody talking down to me.
No, we've covered that already, sir.
Yeah. So
that's an established part of your character.
Right. Well, to quote my TI in basic training, he said, "Goodall, you have everything going for you but your mouth."
And let's just mention your nickname back when you were doing your journalism. Could you just tell the world what you were known as?
Well, General John Vesey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs at the time, told my boss, we call your Sergeant Goodall Agent Orange. That's what they refer to me, Agent Orange.
I was thinking of that son of a bitch from Minnesota.
Oh, yeah, read like that son of a bitch from Chester's. That's how Ben Rich would describe John Andrews.
I like Agent Orange, though. That's a good one.
Well, I have that on some of my posts, like on Lucian.com. It's Agent Orange is my
gotcha.
Yeah.
So we were talking about you were at the observatory, but then you left the observatory, and you brought that up for a reason. Not sure what you were going for there.
Just before I quit, we had a docent meeting with all the astronomers and the number one guy from the National Science Foundation. We're talking about exoplanets and whatever. He said, based on what we have found here at Kitt Peak and collaboration with all the other observatories in the world, we calculate that for every star in the universe, now that's a number you can't cram into anybody's head. For every star in the universe, they figure there's 1.5 planets. And based on that calculation, they figure there's in the neighborhood of 2 billion, and that's with a B, billion Earth-like planets orbiting a similar sized star in an habitable zone with liquid water. Now, the universe is 14.5 billion years old. We're 4 billion years old. So somebody out there has had a 10 billion year head start.
Yeah.
On technology.
Yeah.
And
if they've had a 1 million year head start on technology, you got to assume they're way beyond us. And to talk about billions, it's just mind boggling.
And to quote Jodie Foster's character in movie Contact, if we're the only ones, what a waste of space.
Yeah, it'd be like God's a big geologist collecting pebbles out in the universe, you know? It's got to be a little more interesting than that. So we've got about 10 minutes left in this segment of our interview, and I just want a couple of questions that I would like to just toss out at you and see what you got to say here. So we've been kind of hinting at very advanced technology that's got to be within the very, very covertly held, very advanced. What's your thought on the famous story from 1988 of the alien reproduction vehicle? This is a story in which aviation executive named Brad Sorensen goes to an air show and is shown a craft, actually 3 crafts that he gets to see that are basically flying saucers. Mama Bear, Papa Bear, Baby Bear, they were nicknamed. They're known as the Flux Liner and described as an alien reproduction vehicle. What are your thoughts on this?
Well,
am I on the spot, or is this a problem for you, or do you mind answering this?
No. I mean, just to quote again Ben Rich, I'm honored to have been on his list of people he felt close to. Mm-hmm. And when John Andrews wrote a letter to Ben Rich asking him if he believed in UFOs, and they said there's 2 categories, both man-made and extraterrestrial.
Right. John Andrews saying this, right? John Andrews says this to Ben Rich.
Right.
So he says, "I'd like to know your thoughts on this, Ben."
He sent the letter on a Monday, and I think he had to reply on a Friday from Ben on his corporate letterhead, in his own longhand, cursive. He said, "Both Kelly and I are firm believers in both categories. We refer to ours as unfunded opportunities." He underlines the U, the F, and the O.
Yeah.
If Ben believes in UFOs in both categories, then I would be a fool not to.
Well, I'm on your team here. I believe in them as well. And I think that's a very important letter. Like, that's a very important letter for our history that Ben Rich made that statement. As I recall, Kelly Johnson's name was not listed in Ben's reply, but there is a long history of Kelly Johnson's interest in UFOs. Did you ever know Kelly Johnson?
I have a photograph of an SR-71 that I photographed that he begrudgingly signed for me at it was an engineering conference. It was engineering week at Honeywell Military Avionics Division. They call it the Ridgeway Group. They're in Northeast Minneapolis. They're the one who developed the stabilization augmentation system for the Blackbird, the autopilot, all of the electronics, the inlet control system for the engines. That's all Honeywell. And their keynote speaker, this is February of '81. The keynote speaker is Kelly Johnson. The director of engineering at Honeywell invited me as his guest. Now, I'm sitting way in the back, and Kelly's up there talking, and he said, all of you are aware of the programs that we worked on in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and said the premier one being, of course, our manned Blackbirds, the SR-71, the YF-12, and the A-12. He said, And I can't talk about the little airplane. He was referring to the D-21. He said, but there's some jerk in San Diego area that makes plastic model toys that's talking about coming up with a model of one. And there's some guy that lives up here in the Midwest somewhere who's a real pain in the ass too. He's referring to me.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So he's getting there for talking, and he said, this 1981-82 timeframe. Now I have the exact date written somewhere, but all I know is February, and it was cold, and it was in St. Paul, Minnesota. It was the prom center. And Kelly said, we have the technology right now to go Mach 4, Mach 6, Mach 8, Mach 12, Mach 16. Speed costs money. How fast do you want to go?
Wow.
So a Mach 12 Aurora would not be something that would be out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
And I would
use ordinary kind of scramjets or whatever they use at that speed and liquid fuel. Could it possibly be? It'd have to be on some kind of different principle. Wouldn't that make sense to you?
They have a combined cycle engine. John Andrews and I were at the Little Alien. This would be December 6th, 1993. Snow in the ground. We're going from the Little Alien to one of the trailers, and I was getting something out of my car, and both John and I heard this noise. It is the loudest noise I've ever heard. And I've heard a Saturn I engine fire at Edwards. In fact, it almost killed me because I was out with a buddy of mine breaking the law where we were not supposed to be. But it was the noise was so intense. Now they had airplanes up in the air going in and out of burner to try to mask the noise. And this is the pulse detonation engine used on Aurora.
Right.
I could have had both. Now I already have one auditory nerve severed. I could have had the other one severed. I could still feel the impulse on my body. It was weird. And
so what did you hear then? What was the source of this noise?
They were apparently ground testing the combined cycle pulse detonation engine used on Aurora. And its pulse detonation engine isn't anything that's all that exotic. Basically, you take a regular engine and turn it into a V1 type of motor. That was a pulse motor. But
so in other words, I think what you're suggesting is conventional, although really, really advanced, but conventional types of technologies could in fact get you to Mach 12. That's what you're saying. And by the way, the Aurora, which of course was never officially acknowledged, but a lot of people believe it existed. I think I read the Bill Sweetman book years ago on the Aurora. You probably were involved in that, for all I remember. But he certainly seemed to believe it existed. And what if the Aurora exists? What do you think its mission would have been? Was it the successor to the Blackbird, or would it have some other mission as well?
No, what we believe, and even higher ups have not said, "Hey, you're nuts." We believe, both Sweetman and I believe, that Aurora was used for detecting and monitoring the movement of fissionable materials. One of the big concerns when the Soviet Union came apart, what happened to some of the suitcase bombs? What happened to some of the weapons grade plutonium and whatever that they lost track of?
Sure.
Now, as early as early 1970s, the Soviets said that they had the ability to look at a ship going through a choke point, like the Straits of Hormuz or whatever, or going into the Black Sea, and they could determine the amount of fissionable material on that boat, on that ship. And if it was a certain type, they could tell if it was weapon grade, or if they could tell if it was used for the propulsion system. By 1975, I was told, we had the ability to do that in an airborne platform, and there were a number of modified P-3 Orions that could fly over a Russian or Soviet ship or ships and determine the amount of fissionable material in each one of those ships. Now, what I think happened with cooperation of the Saudis, permission from the Russians to overfly their airspace, Aurora was built and designed to monitor and track the movement of fissionable materials to make sure.
I mean, at the altitudes that it had to be flying at, I'm just amazed, frankly, that they would have the ability. They probably had some of the best detection systems in the world, best cameras going, I would have to think, right?
Well, I mean, they're measuring ocean levels to the millimeter from 22,000 or 21,000 miles in space. I mean, so the technology is there.
They've had it. That's amazing. Yeah.
Just reach in your back pocket and pull out that little thing right here and say, well, gee, I don't know if the technology exists. This is a supercomputer. This is a Cray X1 supercomputer in 19.
Yeah.
This is only an iPhone 6S. It's not even the 10 or the 11.
So we got about a minute to go before we're going to end this segment. By the way, can I get you in for an additional interview after we're done with this one?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, then I want to ask you one more question here. So last question, how far advanced in your imagination and when you're just thinking about this on your own, do you think the secret tech world has gone? Like, what are some of the things that you believe are actually happening right now in secrecy?
I believe we can go from one end of the universe to the other that fast.
Do you think that we are doing that? Do you think that some people are doing that?
Based on what people have told me, specifically Ben Rich, and if anybody should know, I would have to say, if they can do it in Star Trek, if they can do it in Star Wars, Ben said, if you've seen the movies, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort.
This conversation with you, and I have every reason to think that everyone listening feels the same way. So if you stick around, I want to follow up with another segment of this. But right now, I got to say goodbye to everyone who's been listening. That's all we got for this episode of the Richard Dolan Show. I've had as one of the most delightful guests and one of the most informative guests, Jim Goodall, aviation legend and certainly expert and Area 51 expert and everything else, and it's been fabulous. Jim, thank you very, very much for being on here.
It's my pleasure. I'm more than happy to do it again anytime.
That's all we got here. And remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other. Later.